All right, let's jump right into it. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing a really deep dive into a highly precise, step-by-step textual derivation. We're going to focus entirely on how ancient scholars actually proved the biblical prohibition of eating eggs from non-kosher birds. Now, that sounds like a super straightforward thing, right? But as you'll see, finding the exact, undeniable textual proof for it is this incredibly rigorous logical journey. We're going to start with a literal reading of a biblical verse, run into a massive linguistic challenge, and eventually resolve the whole thing just by looking at the physical ink and formatting on Scribal parchment. It's fascinating. Let's get started.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the biblical egg prohibition. Second, analyzing the ostrich name. Third, the linguistic debate. Fourth, scribes and split words. And finally, the Chedorlaomer contrast.
Okay, part 1. The biblical egg prohibition, which is our fundamental legal inquiry.
The precision of this question is absolutely key here. You see, it's universally accepted in this legal framework that eating a non-kosher bird is forbidden, but laws require exact textual foundations. You literally can't just assume an egg is forbidden just because the bird is. You have to prove it directly from the text. So the core legal question driving this entire analysis is this: from exactly where in the text is it derived that the egg of a non-kosher bird is prohibited by biblical law?
Well, the scholars propose an initial hypothesis based on one specific verse. In the book of Leviticus, chapter 11, verse 16, there's this list of forbidden, non-kosher birds. And right in the middle of that list, the text explicitly forbids a creature referred to as the daughter of the ostrich.
Let's break down the logic of this literal reading. Think about it. If the verse simply wanted to forbid the ostrich, it would just say ostrich, right? So by adding the word daughter, what exactly is it trying to tell us? Does an ostrich have a biological daughter whose forbidden status would be somehow different from its mother? No, of course not. An actual offspring inherently has the exact same forbidden status as the mother bird. Because of that, the scholars argue that the word daughter absolutely must be a poetic or structural reference to the egg itself. The daughter of the bird in this context literally is the egg. Boom, prohibition established.
But it's never quite that simple. Let's move to section 2, analyzing the ostrich name, which brings a linguistic challenge to our literal reading.
This is where the debate gets really interesting. A major challenge is raised against that clean, literal interpretation we just did. What if daughter of the ostrich is simply the full compound name of the species? It's kind of like names in English, right? Take the daddy long-legged spider. The word daddy doesn't literally mean it's a father, it's just part of the creature's compound name. If daughter of the ostrich is just the long-form name of the bird species, well then Leviticus is just banning the bird, and suddenly we're right back to square one with absolutely zero textual proof for the egg.
So to test this theory out, the scholars start cross-referencing other biblical texts. They look at Lamentations chapter 4, verse 3, and here the text says, "The daughter of my people has become cruel like the ostriches in the wilderness." Now notice how the bird is referred to here simply as an ostrich, completely without the word daughter attached to it. This proves that the bird can be called just ostrich, which totally lays the groundwork for a massive linguistic debate about what it means when the word daughter is added back in.
On to section 3, the linguistic debate, where we'll examine prophetic texts for context.
To really figure this out, the scholars bring in a verse from Micah, chapter 1, verse 8. The prophet says, "I will make a wailing like the jackals and a mourning like the daughters of the ostrich." Okay, so we have to ask ourselves, in this specific verse, does the word daughters refer to the bird's name, or does it refer to literal eggs? Let's just apply some basic logic to this. The verse is explicitly talking about the action of wailing and mourning. It implies the deep mourning of an ostrich for its children. Now, have you ever seen an egg mourn? Obviously not. Therefore, in the book of Micah, the phrase daughters of the ostrich undeniably describes the living bird engaging in a behavior, not an inanimate egg. And actually, a similar verse in Isaiah describes these creatures dwelling in a location. Again, an egg doesn't actively dwell or inhabit a space, right? A bird does.
And this next one brilliantly illustrates the final linguistic nail in the coffin for our initial theory. Look at Isaiah chapter 43, verse 20. "The animals of the field shall honor me, the jackals and the daughters of the ostrich." This verse is talking about animals actively honoring or singing praise to God.
So the absolutely crucial point is right here. If we stick to the literal reading where daughter equals egg, we hit a major wall in Isaiah. Can an egg sing a song of praise? No way. Therefore, the phrase daughter of the ostrich absolutely must be a compound noun,
a completely valid alternative species name for the bird itself. The linguistic debate concludes that both ostrich and daughter of the ostrich are just two different, totally acceptable names for the exact same non-kosher bird. Which means our verse in Leviticus forbidding the daughter of the ostrich is literally just forbidding the bird. We still don't have our textual proof for the egg.
So where do we go from here? Section 4. Scribes and split words. Focusing on the physical formatting of the text.
This is where this explainer takes a really sharp and brilliant turn. Since linguistics couldn't solve the problem, the scholars pivot to the physical formatting of the manuscript itself. We need to understand two key definitions here. First, a scribe is a professional copyist of ancient manuscripts, and they are bound by incredibly strict, ancient rules of formatting. Second, split words refers to the scribal practice of deliberately dividing a compound phrase into distinct physical components on the page. The spacing of ink on parchment is highly regulated, and get this, it actually carries legal meaning. So, when we look at exactly how the scribe is instructed to write the name in Leviticus, we find a huge anomaly. The scribe actually physically splits the phrase into two entirely separate words with a space between them. Even though it's the compound name of one bird species, the physical separation of the words on the page is interpreted legally. That physical separation implies two distinct legal entities. By forcing the scribe to write the word daughter completely separately from the word ostrich, the text legally reinstates the prohibition of the egg. The text literally breaks the name apart to teach a second law. Mind-blowing, right?
But in this analytical tradition, no proof goes untested. Let's look at Section 5, the Chedorlaomer contrast, testing the scribal proof.
A really brilliant challenge is raised here. If split words on a page automatically prove the existence of two separate legal entities, well, what about the biblical king from the book of Genesis, Chedorlaomer? The scribal tradition also dictates that his name is split into two words, Chedor and Laomer. Yet the biblical narrative clearly states he is a single person, one king. Doesn't this completely destroy the whole theory that split words equals separate entities?
To see the ultimate resolution to this, we really need to focus on the line break rule in this comparison. Yes, both subjects, Chedorlaomer and the daughter of the ostrich, feature word division where they're split into two words. However, look at the strict line break formatting. For Chedorlaomer, the strict formatting rules dictate that the two halves of his name must remain on the exact same line of parchment. He is one entity. But for the daughter of the ostrich, the scribe is actually permitted to split the name across two separate lines of text. So if the first word reaches the margin, the second word can wrap down to the next line.
And there is the ultimate proof. Two lines. Because the scribe is legally permitted to split the phrase across two physical lines, the text is definitively proving that these are two distinct legal subjects. Line 1, the non-kosher bird. Line 2, its legally forbidden egg. That physical allowance to break the text across lines establishes the dual prohibition.
Let's quickly summarize the dialectical steps we just walked through, because it was quite a journey. We started knowing the law forbids the egg of a non-kosher bird, but we needed textual proof. The derivation began with the term daughter in Leviticus. A rigorous linguistic analysis across prophetic texts proved that daughter of the ostrich is actually a valid compound species name, not just a reference to an egg. However, examining the physical manuscript revealed that scribal tradition deliberately splits this compound name. Finally, by contrasting it with King Chedorlaomer, we saw that the unique allowance to split the bird's name across two physical lines definitively, legally separates the daughter, meaning the egg, from the bird itself. It is a truly stunning intellectual journey, don't you think? We moved from standard legal questions, all the way through poetry and linguistics, right down to the physical ink and line breaks on an ancient parchment, just to derive a dietary law. And it leaves us with a really provocative thought to ponder. How often do the physical spaces between words, the formatting and the margins we take for granted every day, actually shape the very foundation of legal reality? Keep that in mind the next time you read a carefully formatted document. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this sparked your curiosity to look a little closer at the text around you.